Thanks everyone for joining us for today's Edge webinar. Today we are going to focus on accessibility with a session called Accessibility is Everyone's Business, what higher ed should prioritize before spring compliance deadlines. I'm Adam Scarzafava, VP for Business Development, Marketing, and Edge events here at Edge, working on engaging with our member community. And this is such an important topic for our member community, so we're excited to get everybody together to focus on it today. First, I want to just share a bit of context about Edge and our role in the community and why we're bringing folks together to explore this topic today. So, Edge is a nonprofit, member-based research and education network and a technology consortium. We were founded by higher education presidents. We're still owned by the group of higher education presidents that founded us. So we really are of, by, and for the higher education community. And our mission and our service area have grown beyond New Jersey. And actually, I need to update these slides because it's not 19 states now, it's 28, I believe. So we're really expanding in the way that we serve the higher ed community, both geographically and in the depth of problems and challenges that we're helping to solve. Because of where we come from and the way our team is constructed, we are experts in education and the public sector. We're really focused on helping to drive the outcomes that higher education institutions need to experience and really take our experience and our expertise to work hand in hand with your teams to customize to what your community needs. And that includes any number of areas. Started with the network. So sort of the heart and the core of what Edge does grows out of our research and education network side with EdgeNet, where we still own and operate a purpose-built optical fiber network that is doing things like facilitating high-performance computing, really data-intensive research, and all the sort of transactional and educational stuff that higher education institutions need to do every day and leverage the internet for. Edge Discovery is that framework that we really focus on research with our members and help to accelerate what they can do in research with technology. Edge Market is our strategic and informed consortium procurement arm. We're able to issue RFPs as a cooperative pricing system, and the results of those RFPs are available to education institutions and public sector organizations nationwide to leverage the contractual frameworks that we award through those RFPs. We host events, networking, and community building opportunities like what we're doing here today and like our EdgeCon conference series. Our spring EdgeCon event is coming up on April 16th at the College of New Jersey here in New Jersey. And it's going to focus specifically on digital teaching and learning and the way digital teaching and learning is impacting higher education today. Accessibility is going to be a big component, we expect, of that conference as well. So we would invite you to come and join us in person there. And then we have, as I said, Edge's team of experts provides thought leadership and solution development in a wide variety of areas to our member community. And we really do that in response to challenges that the higher education community is facing. So just a few of the for instances of things we're working on with our community today. Obviously, AI is at the forefront of a lot of challenges that are facing higher ed today, and we're helping from a few different angles in those areas. We're also working on compliance, not just in ADA and accessibility, but in cybersecurity in a number of different frameworks and helping support institutions with their data and privacy journeys there on the security side, and a lot of application modernization, business process modernization support as new technologies like AI and new applications and platforms come online. But what we're really here to focus on today is the accessibility compliance side of things. And we have Edge's expert in digital teaching and learning and digital accessibility, Dr. Laura Romeo, here with us today. So I will stop sharing my screen, invite Laura to share hers, and get into the meat of today's content.
Great. Let me snag the screen share. Okay, just as a double check. That's good to go?
Yeah, looks great.
Perfect. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here. I am Dr. Laura Romeo. I serve as the Director of Digital Learning Innovation, Scholarship, and Educational Services at Edge. So today, as Adam mentioned, it's really just about kind of taking a step back and looking at where accessibility risk is actually showing up at institutions right now. So not just in courses or on websites, but across operations, IT, communications, student services, kind of all of it. So with the spring compliance deadlines coming up pretty quickly, I did just want to talk about what actually deserves your attention in the next 60 days. So I know some of you are probably well into this work already, and some of you might be newer to the specifics of these standards. Either way, today you're kind of here in the right place. If you touch digital systems, content, student-facing workflows, or institutional policy in any way, this conversation is probably right for you. So let's go ahead and dig in and talk about why this might look so different than it did just a couple of years ago. So a few years ago, accessibility was mostly just like a course level conversation. An instructional designer might catch something, disability services would handle those accommodations as they came in. And then when the digital environment was a smaller part of the student experience, that approach kind of held everything together. But it just doesn't anymore. Technology now touches every single phase. So from recruitment, enrollment, advising, registration, financial aid, even the learning environment itself. When we make decisions about all of those systems together, that impact is going to scale very quickly. So, one inaccessible form or portal can quietly affect thousands of students before anybody speaks up and says anything. And then on the regulatory side, the ADA Title II final rule has set WCAG 2.1 level AA as the standard for public institutions. If that acronym is new to you, WCAG stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and it's the international technical standard. And level AA is just the threshold now for federal rule requirements. These deadlines are tiered by population served. So April 2026 are for entities serving 50,000 or more, and April 2027 for under 50,000. So for many institutions here, this is getting pretty close to the deadline. And then for private institutions, Title II may not apply directly, but there are still sections 504 and 508, and then the Americans Disability Act still do, the ADA. The Department of Justice has been active in enforcement across all institution types. So wherever you are with your specific deadline, um, the question really is about how you're strategically approaching it. And so a big part of this is how we're defining accessibility in the first place. When accessibility is defined narrowly as just compliance, as just a checkbox, institutions typically tend to end up in like a reactive cycle. So they might scramble quickly before a deadline comes, run some scans, fix some of the most visible things, and then move on. And then the same problems are going to continuously come back around because nothing really structural changed. So I think that it's really more useful to think about accessibility as kind of living at the intersection of these three things. Compliance is one, so meeting those legal standards, the WCAG 2.1 AA, ADA, sections 504, 508. That's kind of the floor. That's where it matters. But then there's also usability. So can people actually use these systems in real conditions on a phone with slow internet, using a screen reader, under time pressure? And then the third is equity. And that's just going to answer the question, is this experience consistent across your systems, or does it depend on which department built the form or which faculty member set up the course? So when you think about all three of these together, it just really changes how you approach work with accessibility. It's not something that you tack onto the end of a project, and it doesn't become just one office's responsibility. So it's looking at, the decisions that are made, and what create access and or what don't. And so it really just kind of becomes clear here when you think about how students are actually moving through your institution. So that's where we'll go next. This is something that I continuously personally keep coming back to, and what I also share with everyone that we talk with accessibility, because I think that it's the piece that gets missed most often. Students don't see departments, they see their institution. They visit the website, they apply, they register for classes, they navigate their LMS. They might have conversations with financial aid and then access that part of the portal. They use advising tools. So to them, it becomes a single experience. And if one of those touch points creates a barrier or becomes a roadblock, it doesn't really matter how smooth everything else is, because that barrier is what shapes whether or not they have frustrations. And then honestly, it kind of comes down to whether or not they decide to stay. So from a compliance standpoint, the federal rule reflects this too. It doesn't just give you credit by department, it actually looks at your institution as a whole. So, a student who can access your website but can't actually complete registration hasn't been given that equal access, and that's where those compliance issues are going to come up, as well as, that student frustration. So, this particular reason is why accessibility can't live in one office or become one person or a team solely responsibility. It has to become cross-functional, and it has to become part of those cross-functional conversations. So, where does where do the barriers actually come from? And it's not typically where people might expect. Most accessibility barriers, from my experience, aren't created by people who don't care. They're created by people who are busy, who are doing their best, who might have that knowledge gap, and who just don't have accessibility built into how they currently work. And that's fair. Like I said, it hasn't been part of our conversation until recently. So think about here how content gets published at your institution. If someone needs a form put together and put up fast, they build it, they publish it, and they might move on because it's done. Often I see that there aren't or haven't been accessibility checks built into that workflow. Also, another example is if you're selecting a new student-facing tool, maybe an app that, you're going to integrate into your LMS. That conversation becomes more about the features that the app offers, the cost, and how it integrates. And we found that there isn't the conversation of asking for a VPAT or testing it with a screen reader. So, these occurrences happen and none of it is intentional. But the result and the bottom line is the same, that barriers start building up across systems and across semesters. And so, right now, a lot of institutions are operating in what I call triage mode, scanning, finding problems, fixing things one at a time. And a lot of it's working and it's making sense in the short term. But if you're only fixing individual issues and not looking at why they keep appearing or thematically across your systems, you're probably just going to find yourself in the same cycle next semester or next year. So, I think a more strategic question here is what in your process is producing those barriers and what would it take to change that? So I want to walk through some specific lenses now because accessibility risk looks a little bit different depending on where you sit. We'll cover operations, IT, communications, academic affairs, and student services. So, here you can kind of listen for the one that most connects to your work. And we'll start with operations. If you oversee budgets, manage staff, or run student operations, accessibility failures generally almost never arrive as a formal complaint. They're going to show up more as an operational strain. So then it becomes the help desk who's fielding the same questions about a portal that doesn't work on a mobile device or with an assistive technology. It might become that staff member manually processing things that should be more self-service because possibly the self-service option isn't usable for everyone. So again, it's the system that is kind of pulling up these issues, and these costs are real, but they're kind of distributed. So nobody's tracking the total staff hours spent working around an inaccessible registration workflow. Nobody's putting a number on the student who left because the financial aid portal might have been too frustrating to navigate. So when you're kind of making this internal case for accessibility investment, this is kind of a really compelling framework and thought process. So inaccessible systems do carry those hidden costs. And again, fixing things, kind of moving upstream and how you select tools, how you build your workflows, and how you publish your content is really going to reduce those costs going down. So now I want to talk about IT and infrastructure. Here's a scenario that kind of plays out more often than people realize and what's kind of shown up more frequently in my work. So if a student tries to complete a form on your portal, say that it's, a financial aid verification, or maybe they're trying to withdraw from a course, something like that. The form isn't accessible. The drop-down menus don't work if they're just navigating their computer with a keyboard. Maybe the labels for name, phone number, address aren't connected to the actual field text box. So that leaves the student in a place where they can't finish the form. They call your office, staff member fills it out for them through maybe a different pathway, maybe without the same validation, maybe without the student confirming every field text box directly. And so, possibly what happens there is that now you've got a data integrity question, possibly a FERPA question. And I see IT sometimes sees that more as like a data anomaly or a user error. And of course, there's other versions of this that happen as well. So when a system isn't keyboard navigable, or students have to find different ways to work around issues. So maybe they have to plug in browser extensions, or they skip steps. They abandon the process halfway. So when IT comes in and looks at these problems, they just see incomplete submissions and not the problem itself. And possibly flags as an unusual ticket pattern. Um, but again, that root cause might possibly be accessibility. So if you're on the IT side, I think one of the most useful things that you can do right now is to look through your support tickets and your data anomalies through that lens. So, before thinking that maybe it's a user error, which it might very well be, it's always a good thing to tack on that extra question as to whether it could be about how the system was designed. So shifting that analysis around. So let's look at communications and public facing content. For communications and marketing teams, accessibility risk is really visible. And here it's also attached to reputation, and it becomes really real. So your website is generally the first place that a prospective student or a family will go, and that's their first encounter with you. So if it's not keyboard navigable, or if the PDFs aren't tagged, if your media and videos don't have accurate captioning, if event flyers are just images with no alt text, that's going to communicate something about your institution's values, whether you intended it to or not. And so here, when we prioritize inclusion and belonging, and have that strong message attached to it, the issue becomes that if your site isn't delivering that message, that your site isn't accessible, it becomes a gap that people notice. And those people might be advocacy groups, reporters, regulators. So here, I think, the good news is that accessible communication practices just serve everyone well. So regardless of disability, regardless of if a tool is being used or not, the message here is that plain language is going to help all readers. Captions help more than just people who might be deaf or hard of hearing. They help people in noisy environments, or maybe they're watching it in a second language. Good web structure also helps SEO. So for communication teams, this again, it's not all about compliance. It's not about a checkbox. It just becomes more about better practice. So before I get into our last institutional lens, which is student services, I did want to spend a few minutes on academic content and the LMS, only because it just cuts across so many of these areas. So if you think about the volume of content inside your LMS, that could be documents, slides, videos, assignments, discussion boards across every section running, every department, every semester. That becomes enormous. And a large part of this content was created without accessibility in mind. And again, it's not because faculty are being careless, but more it comes down to because the faculty wasn't taught what accessible content looks like. And so I think there that this is what the distinction is that matters. So when I've been working with institutions on LMS accessibility, I always frame this more as like a training and support issue, certainly not a blame issue. Most faculty don't know that a screen reader can't navigate an untagged PDF, or that bold texting doesn't create that heading structure. So they're just using the tools that they were given, and it becomes that there is a knowledge gap, and it's not on the institution, it's not on the individual, but it is becoming more and more of a priority that is needing to be prioritized. So the institutions that are making real progress in doing so are investing in that practical training. So it becomes less about, here's why accessibility matters. And that conversation is very important. And that's the foundation. But once faculty have that and they understand, the conversation should move to, and training should move to, here's how to do these things. Here's how to add alt text. Here's how to check your heading structure and apply it. Here's how to review your captions. So once people are given the skills and the templates, from what I've seen in my experience, most people are appreciative and they run with it. And, again, it kind of changes that mindset of it's for my students. And so that's where the success comes. Before I leave this page too, there is a vendor piece, which gets overlooked constantly. So if you're using publisher platforms, e-textbooks, homework tools, your compliance depends partly on theirs. So, a question to ask yourself is, do you have their VPATs? And that stands for Voluntary Product Accessibility Template, which is just the vendor's own documentation of how their product measures up against accessibility standards. So if a student can't access required course materials because the publisher's platform is inaccessible, that's also, it becomes half of your problem, the institution's problem to solve, even though you didn't build the tool. So that's an important message to walk away from this conversation with. And for academic affairs, the two biggest priorities right now are getting those vendor documentation in order and then building a faculty training pipeline. And now I want to touch on something that keeps coming across all of these areas, and has been in most of our conversations for the last few years. So AI and automation, where does this kind of stack up? Like I said, I think has come up in almost every single accessibility conversation that I've had in the last few months. And I think that it's a really good thing. I think it means that people are kind of thinking critically about these tools. In my personal opinion, I think that AI can genuinely help. Auto captioning has gotten really good, and there's also AI's ability to draft alt text and make suggestions for that, as well as flag patterns across large content libraries, catch common errors at a speed that, no human team can match. So those are the real benefits there of AI, and I would say use them um, with a caution. So AI output isn't the same thing though as accessible content. I think that's really important to hear. So what AI can put out is not necessarily going to be accessible. Auto captions still miss technical terms, proper nouns, accents that show up. AI generated alt text often sometimes gets the description right of that image, but it might miss the purpose of the image in the context of the content. And then AI generated documents can look fine on the surface, but have really poor structural problems underneath. Sometimes when you take AI generated documents and copy and paste them into your platforms, the heading structure is not there. They're just things that are missing. So the one way that I think about it is that AI is a good first draft. However, somebody still needs to review those captions before they go out. Somebody still needs to check that the alt text actually works in the context. And institutions, from what I've seen that are using AI well, are treating it as a starting point and not as a finished product. So as I said, let's go ahead and get into student services. So this is where students kind of actually feel all of this. This is where accessibility goes from abstract to personal. So if you think about the systems that students interact with day to day, so not just their LMS, but the operational stuff, that's going to look like advising, scheduling, registration workflows, financial aid, orientation, maybe even the chatbot on your website. These are the systems where students are trying to do something essential. And typically for them, it's going to be on a deadline. And most of the time, it's without a plan B. So what we are consistently seeing is that when these systems have barriers or roadblocks, students might not always file a complaint. They might get frustrated. They might call a parent. They might just give up and stop trying. And so that leads them to maybe miss a registration window, or maybe they don't finish a financial aid application. And, again, they kind of quietly drop off. And so here, it's not just a compliance concern, it becomes for your institution a retention concern. And it often happens without anyone really realizing it. So when I talk about what to focus on in the next 60 days, I think that student-facing service workflows are going to be at the top. Not necessarily because they're easy to fix, but because they have the most direct impact on students and their lives and whether or not they stay. So we've looked at this from 5 different angles now. So now I want to talk about why the siloed approach that has been in effect in historically in the past in institutions as a default doesn't hold up here anymore. So you possibly noticed a pattern across all 5 lenses that we talked about. So in every area, the problems get worse when people are working in isolation. Um, Most institutions don't have one person who owns accessibility across the board. And they probably shouldn't. It touches too many things. So, but what ends up happening is that everyone assumes that someone else has it covered. It's somebody else's problem. Um, so again, as an example, IT figures that the vendor built it right, as we would hope they would. Communications assumes that the web team tested it. Student services might assume that IT reviewed the portal. And then faculty, assume that the LMS is where it needs to be and that it's being taken care of. So again, here, nobody is necessarily wrong. I think that we're just operating here, all working with incomplete information. And so what works is when we have shared visibility. So if there are consistent standards shared across departments, accessibility as a standing item in procurement. So again, regular touch points where people can have this in their communication where they compare notes. And I'm not saying that it has to be a big committee. You know, we have seen where institutions have started with a monthly 15 to 30-minute call between IT and student affairs, just comparing kind of what each team was seeing. And that one conversation might surface issues that neither group will catch on their own. So again, kind of pulling teams together and having those open collaborations about what's being flagged, what's not working, or maybe what's working well, and starting to move it away from a single person or department. Uh, so, for any of you that might be in compliance or legal roles here, or anyone who has had to communicate this to leadership, I want to shift a little bit and talk about what the good faith effort actually looks like. So, I think that with the deadline coming up very soon for a lot of institutions, there has now been a lot of anxiety around this. And I think that it's really worth being direct about. So, the concern that I've heard recently is usually something like, we have thousands of web pages, years of backlogged course content, dozens of tools that are in use, and there's no way we're going to be fully compliant by April. And honestly, and I'm saying all of this not from a legal opinion. However, having a pulse on the trends of everything. Perfection, well, and honestly, here, perfection by the deadline isn't realistic for most institutions. And I believe that regulators know that. So, what they're really looking for and what resolution agreements consistently require is that you have evidence and that you have a system in place. So, a resolution agreement, if that's a new term, it's just the set of requirements that the government puts in place when they find an institution out of compliance. And what those agreements ask for isn't that everything is fixed. It's looking at, do you have a policy? Have you done an evaluation? Do you have a remediation plan in place with timelines? Are you training people? Have you built accessibility into procurement? Do you have a way for someone to report problems and know who to go to? So I think that that's the big difference between being vulnerable and being defensible. So, can you show how this is being managed? Is there progress and is there accountability? This documentation piece is honestly the most undervalued thing that I see. I think a lot of institutions are doing really good work, but they're not writing it down. They're just taking action. But I think this is where you stop and pause, and you really need to track your remediation. You need to log all of your training. You need to kind of organize your audit results if you've done audits. That paper trail is going to be the strongest asset right now. And so that to me is what the good faith effort looks like. Um, Moving into that, I do want to talk a little bit more about what measurement looks like kind of more broadly. I think that there is a misconception that, you need a perfect score by a certain date. And that's not quite how it works. So, automated scans, manual audits, and user feedback are each going to show you different things, and none of them tell the whole story standing alone. So, automated tools, Wave, Lighthouse, there are some other ones, but these are free browser-based tools that anyone can use, and they're really good at catching technical issues at scale. So, these will come up with missing alt text, contrast problems, heading structure. But one thing to note is that they do only identify about 30 to 40% of the WCAG issues. So the rest here needs that human review. You really need to look at it as if you were a user, looking at your reading order, keyboard navigation, whether that alt text actually does communicate the right thing in context. If your screen reader is, reading correctly and letting you navigate the content in a way that's not confusing or frustrating. And so then there's also that user feedback piece, which again is, in my experience, from what I've seen, probably the most underused resource at most institutions. If you ask, students will tell you what's not working. I think that, we just need to find a way and give them a way to do that. So the takeaway here from this particular slide is that you don't need a perfect score by a date, that you just need direction and evidence of effort. So, again, the questions that you should be asking are you identifying the problems? Are you prioritizing them? And then are you making actionable progress? That's what compliance is going to look like in practice. And the biggest leverage points here you have is procurement. So every time your institution signs a contract with a technology vendor, so whether that's a portal, a registration system, a publisher platform, an advising tool, you are inadvertently making an accessibility decision, whether you realize it or not. So if that tool that you're signing on to isn't accessible, you've then kind of baked a barrier into your infrastructure for the life of that contract. So here, this is why adding accessibility to procurement is going to be one of the highest impact changes that you can make. And that means requiring current VPAT. So remember, voluntary product accessibility template, or an accessibility conformance report, an ACR, from every vendor. So it's less about asking, are you accessible? Because a lot of vendors will say yes without any documentation to back it up, but it's more about, okay, show me that you are. And if vendors know of issues that they've flagged, asking them, what's your timeline for the fix? Again, your compliance is half reliant on that communication and documentation with your vendors. So it's really important. Um, uh, a VPAT that's 5 years old or shows does not support across multiple criteria is going to be a red flag for you. You want current documentation, and again, you want to understand their roadmap. So, what are they working on, and what their timeline looks like? Because you're going to want to have accommodation plans put in place while that work is being done. Legally, when a student can't use a required tool, it then becomes the institution that's responsible for providing equal access, not the vendor. So again, what's the accommodation plan that you're going to put in place while the vendor is working on the issue? So a quick one here. Let me pull my screen down, is to inventory your student-facing vendor tools and start collecting those VPATs. Most institutions that we work with have documentation for, at the start, before we had these conversations, maybe a third of their tools. Some vendors have never been asked. So that gap is useful to know about. And the inventory itself, again, is going to be that valuable piece of compliance documentation. And you can go ahead and start those communications with your third parties to make sure that you are meeting the requirements. So let's pull all this together. What should you actually focus on in the next 60 days? You can't fix everything in 2 months. And that's a reasonable thing to think. But you can take some targeted steps that are going to lower your risk and demonstrate that institutional commitment. So high priority, what you need to start with are your highest traffic student-facing pages. I'm not talking about your whole website, just those critical pathways. So admissions, registration, financial aid, and your homepage. Run an automated scan, but again, also do something simple. Tab through the page with just your keyboard. Can you reach every link, every button, every form field? Can you tell where on the page you are? That one test is going to tell you a lot. And that's just for keyboard users or keyboard navigation. There are some other manual tests that you should run for other types of disabilities and accessibility tools. However, that one's going to be a great starting place. And then looking at your critical documents. So the PDFs and forms that students actually have to have, Again, that's going to be applications, financial aid forms, policy documents. Those tend to be some of the worst offenders in accessibility criteria flagged. Uh, Thinking back at your institution, you might have years of content that is still being used, and maybe that content has untagged PDFs on floating around on the website. That's going to be a barrier. Another place to start that's kind of high priority immediate is to check video content, looking at are things captioned, and if they are the captions accurate? Like I said, auto captions are a great starting point, but they're not going to be sufficient on their own. And starting to collect those VPATs from your vendors, that's another great place for you to start immediately. And then on the strategic side, and this is kind of where long-term protection comes in, build accessibility into your procurement. I know I've said that before, but I think that it's going to protect you and sustain this process a lot longer than just meeting the deadline. Here, another great thing is to get your accessibility policy documented and then make it public. Set up that cross-departmental coordination. Start your faculty training and then write your plan down. That's another really important piece. So, what's the scope? What's the timeline? What are your progress goals? That documented remediation plan is going to be one of the most valuable things that you can have if anyone actually asks you to demonstrate compliance. And then I want to leave you with something that you can do next week. I'm going to take a water break. Hang on. I know this was a lot of me talking at you, but I don't want to leave anyone feeling paralyzed or anxious. So here's something small and concrete. Pick one system that you have influence over. So whether that's a portal, a set of web pages, a workflow, a set of forms, and then ask 3 questions about it. First question, who's expected to use this? Not just the typical user, students with disabilities, students on phones, students whose first language isn't English, students who are navigating your institution for the first time. These are kind of questions that you want to ask as far as what's the expectation of use and who. Number 2, what does this system assume? Does it assume that everyone can see the screen or use a mouse or read at a certain level? Possibly even that they have reliable internet. So that's question number 2. And number 3 is what happens when someone can't use it? So is there a backup plan? Do they have someone to contact? Or do they just get stuck and abandon it? And then the next step of this is to pull one person from another department into that conversation. So if you're in IT, you could grab someone from student services. If you're in communications, you could talk to enrollment. You'll start to see things that neither of you would have called alone. And that's kind of how this work starts and how it continues. So one system, 3 questions, and then one conversation across a department line. Before we go to questions, I did just want to briefly share how we do this work at Edge. So a lot of what we talked about today, these are things that we help institutions work with every day. So some come to us for audits. They want to know where they stand against the WCAG 2.1 level AA across their websites, their portals, their LMS, and we combine automated scan with manual review to give a prioritized report. So not just errors, but also that critical roadmap for what to address first and why. We also handle policy and documentation. So accessibility policies, public statements, remediation plans, everything that definitely needs to be in writing and in place and shared. All of that documentation that positions you for compliance. And we don't just hand you a report and walk away. We can also, while we're in there auditing, we can do the remediation work itself or come back as a phase 2 with your teams to help that out. So documents, PDFs, LMS materials, web content. When you think about, having a tight timeline and teams that need hands-on help, we can kind of step in alongside those teams. We also do some leadership consultation. So working with your provost, VP, CIOs, compliance officers, any other team members that you want to pull in on how to structure this internally, looking at allocating resources, building the case for sustained investment, thinking about this as not a one time, one semester effort, but more treating it like how this is how institutions can now start with a great foundation and continue that and build. Um, and then what I personally love and care about the most is, and not that all the other work is not important, it certainly is. But I think that the training and building sustainable practices piece is going to be where you're able to see the most actionable practice happen. The goal is never to create dependency on your accessibility team. It should be working with your people to get to the point where they can do this themselves. And again, where it becomes that mindset shift of I'm being proactive about this and not reactive. So we're building out frameworks for ongoing spot checks, that continued training cycle, vendor monitoring. These things are what give this work kind of staying stuck power after the deadline passes. So, if any of this resonated, we would love to talk to you. I'm going to drop two contacts on the next slide. They're on our team. They're probably the best people to reach out to. And we would love to now close this out and open it up to questions. Again, you know, bringing this back around, we talked about why accessibility looks different and how barriers get created through process rather than neglect, and then how this plays out across different areas. So, one thing that I'd like to leave you with is that the institutions who are making real progress that we're seeing aren't the ones with possibly the biggest budgets. They're the ones who have people in different departments that have started talking to each other. So again, someone in IT asked a student services if they test the portal with a screen reader. Just someone in communications that added accessibility to their content checklist. Again, it becomes a proactive practice within your community. So these conversations add up. They do shift the culture, and that's what turns your scramble into something that's sustainable. So I'll close with, accessibility is everyone's business. And I think the fact that you're here tells us that. So gonna give it over to Adam. Hopefully you've monitored the chat a little bit. We can open it up. Have a little bit of time left.
Yes, I have been monitoring the chat, and we have plenty of questions that have come in. We'll probably be asking you to spend a few extra minutes with us if you want to go through all the questions. If not, again, we'll make the recording available to everyone so that you can go back and review it. So to start off with, I'll start right at the first question that was asked just a couple minutes into the session. Please address how institutions can affordably remediate inaccessible documents. Is it best to invest in tools that do this automatically, or is it better to outsource this work to freelancers or contractors? Trying to figure out what's most feasible, practical, and affordable on the document side.
Yeah, so I think this hits 2 points. I think that there are some really great tools out there, but they are automated. And so, as I mentioned, that the automated tools only catch about 30 to 40%, and they don't take into account usability, so the user experience. So, with that, it's a great baseline. If you've got them, there's some good free ones out there too. But use that as a starting point, and then go in and kind of do those manual checks. And then with that, here's my part two of the question. I think that where you will find the most movement on having the mass amount of fixes that need to be done fixed is yes, have those automations flag it. Yes, go in and do the manual testing. So again, you know what additional things need to be fixed, but training is going to be your biggest area of movement, because if you're having teams or whoever is going to be accountable for this work, if they don't know what they're looking for or what once they found it, what to do with it, you're going to kind of come to a standstill. So.
Yeah.
I think that getting those how-to documents and processes in place it's going to move the needle a lot more.
And the second part of that question of whether to outsource, I think, kind of comes down to the size and capability of the teams that are addressing this too, right? And that's part of what Edge can step in and do as well. If you do have a small team that's trying to support the full sort of scale and scope of this, we do have those resources available at nonprofit rates to come in and backstop your team and take on some of that overflow work if you need us to. So that's key to think about too, just depending on how much of the team is familiar with being able to remediate some of that stuff themselves, and that's a great thing to do. And then, if there's overflow, we are here to help. So we've had a couple questions about the meaning of enrollment size in the new rule. So, can you clarify that the population thresholds compliance deadlines are based whether they're based on the population of the public entities, public institutions jurisdiction, or is it the number of students enrolled at the university?
Yeah, so it's not going to be your student enrollment. It's going to be about like the population size surrounding it. So you're like the county is kind of the best way to look at it. And I think that this question of distinction comes up all the time.
Yeah.
Because unless you know the nitty-gritty of the DOJ and what they released, it's tricky, right? Because the wording is not exactly explicit. However, so the one thing to take away is that population threshold is based on the total population of the like the geography of the jurisdiction that the entity serves.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Yeah, so not enrollment, it's more about the population and depending on how that gets categorized, whether it's for a county college or a community college or a state university may be different, but I think we're probably dealing with larger population sizes than enrollment sizes. So the sort of pending deadline soon here probably applies
Mhm.
to a lot more institutions than it would if it was based on enrollment size.
Right, yeah, and yes.
Yeah. Okay. We've had a couple questions come in. Just a quick housekeeping thing about the recording and the slides. We will be distributing the recording. It'll be posted to our website and to our YouTube channel. So we'll make sure that you guys all have access to that and follow up to the session. Back to questions. Can you provide some advice on how to educate people that a perfect score with an accessibility checker, like we talked about earlier, may not actually mean that the content is really accessible? How do you suggest communicating that?
Yeah, so again, I mean, I would take it back to the fact that the accessibility checker is that automated tool, and they're only going to catch 30 to 40%. So that leaves 60 to 70% open. It might say that it's accessible because it has, it's looking at these specific things, alt text headers, tagged for PDFs. Like there are only a certain number of things that it's looking for. However, as a user walking through, if I'm using a specific assistive technology tool, my tool itself might not, and the tools are great, and I'm not downing them at all, but sometimes they don't talk with, the files or the systems that they're trying to interact with. And so that's why manually you have to kind of go in and think like the tool, or think like the user would go through. So, for somebody that does have like a motor disability and they're just using that keyboard navigation. What? Okay, I'm walking way back from the actual question. I think that if you're trying to address that perfect doesn't mean fixed, I would go back to, you have to do that manual scan and you have to think about usability.
And if you need some backup, we are happy to sort of help communicate that with an outside expert perspective to your university community in an appropriate way if you would like us to be part of that communication process with you. So we're always happy to provide that perspective from the outside too. Um, we've had a couple questions come in that are sort of subject matter area specific. So I'll sort of group these together and maybe we can answer them more specifically and separately in follow up. But we've had questions come in about particular difficulties in departments like math and music, in departments like meteorology, geology, archaeology, HVAC, and other more technical areas like that. Do you have recommendations on how to work with those sorts of departments that are maybe substantially relying on visual, more, sort of more visual information and folks in those departments telling um, accessibility compliance support people that because they're doing that, they're pushing back on the need to make those sorts of materials accessible. What's the perspective on some of those maybe more difficult to support departments, what that process looks like, and what responsibilities everybody has in those areas?
Yeah, and I think, in our work going in and doing the remediation cleanup of these types of content areas in the courses themselves, those departments do tend to have the large number, like it's just a vast amount of issues that need to be fixed because they do rely on, a screenshot of an equation. However, if you're thinking about somebody that's using a screen reader, they won't be able to see what or hear what the equation is. If it's just an image. So I go back and forth on this because it's a really hard question to answer if you don't have the buy-in from the faculty and staff to actually take the time to make the fixes. Um, so I think that's kind of number one is to, again, work on shifting the mindset of getting those instructors behind. It's all about student success. It just becomes a complete, like, I mean, a student is unable to access their content in a way that their peer is if, they don't have these issues addressed and meeting the requirements. And I don't honestly, I don't have a great answer. I'm still working through it myself. It is just such a time consuming thing to go in and adjust all of the content. However, I think, it's best practice. I know people take that with a grain of salt. But the best thing that I think you could do to support those people and say like you are being supported is to give that how to. Like, again, it's so hard when you're being asked to make things compliant up to a certain standard by checking X, Y, and Z if you don't even know what you're really looking for, and then once you find it, how to fix it.
Yeah.
It's not an innate skill. Like you actually have to go in and learn how to do it. So I think that training piece is helpful because then the confidence is instilled. That takes away that time of well, now I have to slog through and like find a video on how to do this or like read a how-to guide. If it's already all there in one place for them, that's helpful. And then I think too, having that accountability piece is really important, not just to say, well, it's your content, it's your responsibility. It is. The bottom line is it is. But, to give them the message, you're not alone. You have support. Here's a team. Some great things that I've seen in practice are that the department as a whole, or even a couple of instructors, get together and have accessibility fix sessions.
Mm.
And what you might find is that one instructor has similar content that they could share with another, and then that becomes less work, right? So I mean, there's some options as far as suggesting workarounds. But it's a
Yeah.
hard thing. It's hard. I mean, there's no great
And
thing for that.
yeah, and I know we've done a lot of hands-on work, particularly in mathematics courses on helping institutions sort of just kind of work through the slog of doing that course by course and image by image. So it's we're we're in the trenches experiencing the same thing. Do you know if your team has come across any automated tools that make that process easier for any of those more sort of complex visual disciplines, or is it really you got to be hands-on?
I think that in this case, unfortunately, and I hate being the messenger for this, but you have to be hands-on. There, you know, thinking about like I'm just thinking about if somebody had a PowerPoint presentation, the PowerPoint's really great in offering auto-generated captions, like the alt text captions. However, again, it comes back to the presentation. If you don't understand that generated caption in the context of why it's presented, then it becomes either confusing or annoying for somebody that is trying to get to why that image was put on the slide in the first place. So I think that, that would, yes, there are some built-in tools that help. You can kind of build the foundation for yourself so you're not having to generate the thought all by yourself.
Hmm.
But in some cases, it is that you literally have to go in and kind of, use the text box tools with the symbols
Yeah.
and everything to add in. So
Okay.
yeah, but
Um,
I mean, good
we
news is once you fix it once, it's fixed. So like,
we
I
did
know.
touch a little bit there. We did touch a little bit there on faculty buy-in and faculty engagement in that process. We had a comment come in that faculty training is an excellent solution, but especially in public institutions when your faculty's collective bargaining contract doesn't allow for required trainings, course reviews, or sometimes even reading university communications, it can be difficult to get that across. So um, any recommendations for sort of communicating through the faculty resistance on some of these things?
Yeah, and I hate to have to lean on you have to because you have to, or else, you could be sued. But that's, right
Oh, and that
now,
was
if
another question sort of related was, are we expecting faculty to actually be named in lawsuits if they come up? Are we expecting instructors to be named parties? And is
yeah,
that maybe part of the the stick approach rather than the carrot, I guess?
right. I don't know. I'm not, like I said, I'm not legal. So I
Yeah.
don't have that perspective. I don't know how in the weeds some of these, legal proceedings might go. Um, However, the message that you should be giving to your instructors are you own your content and therefore you are accountable in some way. And if they're attached to the institution, therefore the institution is accountable, so like I don't know. Again, I hate to lean on the bully stick of that, but
Yeah. Okay. Um, let's see, working through a few other questions. Um, what would be an effective way to pressure our vendors into addressing accessibility gaps in their ebooks, tutorials, or assessments? While some seem to be making great strides, others are woefully behind. And this sort of relates to another question that says, I've looked at some VPATs and thought, the standard that they're expressing in the VPAT looks good, but I don't know if that's truly being met in what they're producing and what we're actually using. How reliable are those documents legally?
right. And so I think that's kind of where a lot of vendors are finding themselves at a crossroads right now because they are also being held accountable more so than they have been historically in the past. The first question was about
Ebooks specifically, but also sort of tutorials and assessments and other things that vendors are making available digitally.
right. What about that?
Uh,
Sorry.
just if there's an effective way to pressure
Ah,
vendors
okay.
into addressing
Right.
those gaps, because some are
Yeah.
making strides and some aren't.
So I think if you want them to have the best quality product for the user. And you would hope that they would, right? But not every that's not the case that we're finding. So I think that what you can do as an institution or whatever your department you're living in right now, is to start that communication with the vendor and say, okay, I need to see your VPAT, I need to see your the ACR, and that is more of like an updated thing. But that'll give you a good timeline of, do they know what the issues are and are they addressing them? And let me try to pull in the second question too with this. So that communication is going to be key for your compliance documentation for you to say, I am trying. And with that too, when we go in and we do audits of some of these platforms, or within the vendor supported forms or whatever, that we're seeing, we can flag those issues and say, this is what is not meeting the compliance requirement, specifically tied to whatever the WCAG standard is. And that goes in your communication with them. And so then you have a record of saying, I know exactly what you're not meeting, what's your plan to meet it, and what timeline. And again, it comes back to the fact that you kind of need to know what their gaps are, because what you don't want to happen is, in the meantime of you waiting on them to fix their side, you have a user file a complaint saying, they can't access it. And I mean, it's half of your responsibility because you're using that vendor. So I think reaching out to all of your vendors, and getting that documentation, and then having those conversations, to say, like, I need to see it tested. Or you can go in and or we, what whoever, and we're happy to do that. We've done that, is to go in and use the tools and test it and say, this is out of compliance. And that will give you a great starting place.
And part of pressure could be leveraging community too. I mean, that's, part of Edge's role as a cooperative pricing system. We're working directly with vendors every day, awarding contracts, and so we have sort of the leverage of our consortium as well, that we can help to maybe put pressure on some of these vendors and make them see that it's not one institution or two institutions kind of raising their hand and having these issues, that they're part of a bigger consortium that needs to see movement on these changes to have accessible and acceptable products available for their community. So we're always happy to be another voice uh, in that conversation as well. Um, on the note of the types of procurements that we're doing, we had a question come in. One of the level AA requirements for synchronized media, that is video, is the provision of audio descriptions. Seems to be one of the most difficult hurdles to overcome when using video. Do you have any recommendations on tips, or tips on doing audio descriptions at scale? And I think one of the things we've heard from our community is that historically has been one of the most difficult and most cost prohibitive um, of these accessibility items that needs to be addressed. And so we've actually, in anticipation of this, taken an action on the procurement side to go to market for some of the leading providers of this audio description software. So we're actually in the final review stages right now of an RFP for video captioning and audio description software tools, and audio and AI enabled tools, which are, from what we can tell, hopefully bringing the cost way down on these things. And we're actually considering whether we can build sort of a consortium group of schools knit together to make sort of a cooperative investment in that sort of a solution to bring that cost down even more, as using the power of our consortium. So stay tuned for more there. I don't know if you want to add anything there, Laura, but that has been one of the bigger cost prohibitive sorts of things we've seen come up, and so we're trying to address that with the consortium nature of what we do. Anything to add?
Um, no, that was really thorough.
Okay, cool. Um, on deadlines and things, are both private and public institutions given the same WCAG guideline? We were told private institutions had until next spring to be compliant. What do we see as far as those deadlines for private institutions?
Right. So private operates a little bit differently. They're not actually falling under the Title II WCAG guidelines. However, as I mentioned, there are some other standards that they're being held against that are like in effect right now. So that would be Section 504, 508, and then the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Okay.
And that they those are less specific as far as, the leveled standards that we're seeing. However, there is general verbiage in there that, things should be accessible. So private is a little bit out here, but I would say that it's still applicable. Not to, I don't know what, the government's going to do. So they could lump that in with 2027 deadline. I haven't heard. Um, any talk about that. Not to say it can't happen, but with that being said, even without the compliance deadlines, the idea is best practice. You should still be accessible.
And so there are existing standards, and if you're sort of trying to map to a bulletproof standard, kind of taking the public institutional standard would be something that makes sense, I guess, right?
100%. Yeah, it's I mean it's a international regulation, so it's a good it's a good wholesome
Yeah.
list.
And we have another comment come in that says, and privates that receive funding from Department of Health and Human Services are impacted by an HHS rule requiring accessible digital materials by May 2026.
Okay.
So we'll make sure we're mapping to that as well, of course. But that's good perspective too. That private institutions are going to have some different sort of reporting lines and compliance deadlines and things, but it's still a good standard to be sort of mapping to. Another question here. Some of our people are trying to make interactive Power BI reports accessible. Do you have any suggestions? They're hoping to use Microsoft Copilot to auto-describe the graphs that are dynamically generated for the individual user. Is that something that you've seen or heard of, or is that an area where we're going to need to get more hands-on?
Yes, I want to dig a little bit because I don't have extensive like usage of either, to be honest. But I do know that Power BI has some pretty good like built-in accessibility features that can be kind of turned on for this purpose. So and I will say too, for a screen reader, a clean data table is a lot more far useful than any sort of a chart description.
Mm.
So, making sure that that's enabled is going to be far. That should kind of be the first move. And then addressing using Copilot, I actually think that's a really solid like idea and instinct. Um, Again, I think we should leverage AI and the tools that are being built for generating like accessible content. The same caution applies here, though, it's a good starting point. It's going to give you a nice base, but it's not the finished product. So I think go in with that. There should be some sort of review or quality check on whatever description is generated.
Trust but verify regular reviews of the work product on that stuff. So
Yep.
that makes sense. We have a few more questions still to get to here. Um, let's see what's next. Are you aware of any examples of institutions who are WCAG 2.1 level AA compliant today? And I know you said very difficult to sort of be 100% compliant across the board, and part of it is showing that you're making the effort. Do you know of anybody that stands out as sort of an exemplar on this stuff?
Yeah, so there's a couple, and try to keep a pulse on them and what they're doing. So some institutions that are more widely recognized for like their mature program of accessibility are University of Washington, Michigan State, and California State University are three that come to mind. They have kind of been leaders in this space for longer than the more immediate conversations have happened. So I think that they just have like a more robust system and infrastructure in place. So, if you're looking for an exemplar, I would look for them. They're typically cited in the field, so they're doing great work.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you. A few more here. Do you think it's feasible for an Office of Information Technology to remediate all web pages alone without departmental input?
I think this question could go two ways. So yes, I mean, if they have the time and resources, yes. I will say I would like to know more, I guess, because is the point that you're doing it without their knowledge might not be a great relationship builder. However, I think again it all comes back to this doesn't have to be siloed work. Start having those cross institution communications happen. Talk to the department. Why are you doing the revamp? Who's it going to impact? Is it going to impact them? I think it also depends on what are you changing. Like, are you doing a whole overhaul of their content? Definitely worth pulling them into the conversation for? Or is it just back end, HTML coding, website page work, to have it be more usability friendly on, a tool side? Again, I still think it'd be best practice to at least loop them in. But
Or, maybe again on the carrot or the stick, if the IT team is sort of doing that blanket approach and going through a lot of the pages from an accessibility perspective, tell them, changes are coming one way or another, and we'd prefer that you participate, but we need to get this accessible. So if the team is investing the time and doing that, maybe that's part of the motivation for the department to get involved. And unfortunate that it might have to come from that sort of an angle, but always possible, I guess. Um, a few other questions here. We're still rolling, so thank you to everybody for spending a whole bunch of time with us this afternoon. We'll keep going as long as we have these questions and Laura's got the time. So you talked about student-facing tools. Should we be doing the same for employee-facing tools and dashboards as well? Do colors and symbols that are used for branding need to be addressed or changed as well?
so I guess the approach that I like to take is that it doesn't necessarily have to be a student, but a user, like public.
Mhm.
So, and that's not even because public could be exclusive. If you've got like a login, yes, the answer is yes. Yes, faculty portals should be compliant as well.
Yeah, and employee internal tools, dashboards, things like that. I would assume the same
Yeah, I mean,
applies.
disabilities don't stop at 18 years old.
Right.
So
Sure. Um, okay, a few more here. How do you respond to faculty who might say, if you're going to enforce accessibility requirements, I'll just remove all of my digital resources, so I won't have anything that will need to be inaccessible.
I could be really cheeky, and say that sounds like a horrible course. Okay, so, but realistically, I think that I would get to the root of the problem here, and it sounds like maybe there's just a knowledge gap in them knowing how to fix what needs to be fixed. And so with that, I would lead with, yes, it's a daunting task to have all of your materials accessible. However, here is a support guide, and it will walk you through what to look at, what to look for, and then how to fix it. I would
Yeah.
keep it professional.
Yeah. Sort of back to the how-to tutorial enablement support and try and make it
Training.
as easy as possible for them to not come to that answer, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, Another question here. Can you recommend a tool or database system that institutions can use to keep track of and update their accessibility plans or efforts that can be used and collaboratively across departments? So have you seen any tools that are being used successfully to do that?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think I think that what you want to look for is a platform that allows, live updates, and then the ability to share easily. So, first thing that comes to mind is Microsoft SharePoint, or Teams. That works really great if you're kind of already into the Microsoft ecosystem. Um, Google Drive, that one works. It's just kind of an area where you can kind of document and log everything and then share it out, and have people communicate on the documents themselves. That's really helpful. And again, um, you'll want a space large enough to house all of your progress. So, whether that looks like the VPATs that you get from your vendors, you could have a folder for that, or training completion. So, who attended what training, just kind of keep everything all in one place. And then, you could share it with everybody, or you could be strategic about who sees what. So I know
And
it's not fancy. It's cheap though.
no, and
So
I mean even like tools like we use Monday.com for some things in the background at Edge, and that can be a great way to sort of build a dashboard that is accessible to different folks, and they can use it to work together on tasks and things like that. And I know they have some leniency on nonprofit pricing. I don't know what that would look like for each and every institution, but that could even just something a collaborative kind of dashboard tool like that.
yeah, and I've seen like Trello and Asana that also
Yeah,
have some tiered levels of work. It could work for small teams for sure.
yeah.
It just depends on how inclusive you want to be with your sharing. But again, I know you're asking for tools. I think that the structure is really what matters here. That you just have like a system in place, so that you have that accountability, and a place where everybody can kind of share in the conversation and the findings. That's going to be important.
Yeah. Um, More sort of targeted question, and we may have kind of touched on this earlier when we were talking about sort of some of the automated documentation reviewing. Is there a recommended solution we have for Adobe PDF accessibility compliance? And again, I think any of that is going to come with you also want to get in there and have a human review and at least spot checks. But is there a tool or a number of tools that we've found
I mean,
successful?
if it's a PDF and you have Adobe, they have an accessibility checker built in. So you can run that and again see what gets flagged. I will say that from my experience using that, Adobe has a little bit more of a thorough check than what I've seen like from Microsoft Word.
Mhm.
Not to say again, you don't want to get in and go look at it yourself, and give
Yeah.
it a once over, but and with Adobe, they also let you fix things in real time and then save the new version of the document, so it's already compliant. It like actually kind of does the fix for you, and that's an 100% like once you have the fix done, it's done. So
Yeah.
it's a good tool to have.
Yeah, and I know on Edge Market under our procurement contracts we offer things like Blackboard Ally too, which sort of does a similar thing more broadly, and I know can apply to PDFs. But again, best practices with all this stuff is to make sure there's a human in the loop and double checking this stuff. So, a few other questions before we wrap up, and again, if you have one or two more that you want to slide in under the wire here, please feel free. Many faculty rely heavily on third-party videos from places like YouTube, and
Mhm.
have built lessons and classes around these. How are institutions handling this, especially given issues with incorrect captioning?
Yeah, and so that's something that has come up in a couple of our audits and remediation work with multiple institutions, multiple departments. This is not to say that YouTube videos should not be used. I think that they're a great resource for content. It just, you need to go in and check, are the captions there? Because some YouTube videos don't even have them. And then listen to, like, as you're listening to the video, read the captions, make sure it follows along. That's going to be your kind of step one. Step two, if they're not correct, my recommendation is that you just provide an additional transcript. So it could be just a basic Word document with everything that was said. And again, go back through and manually check, did they get the names right? Did anything not get accounted for? Just so that it does follow along exactly. But there's a couple of different ways that you could get a transcript without sitting there and typing it yourself. And like Adam said, we're working on procuring that feature with a tool. So happy to continue that conversation. But yeah, it's now I've forgot what the core of the question is, but I think I answered it.
Yeah, no, you did. I mean,
Okay.
around the sort of third-party tools and videos from somewhere like YouTube that you don't necessarily control the content and the captioning on. So definitely a sticky a sticky issue. So we had one other sort of legal related question related to the HHS mandate and the status of that in court with a class action suit right now. Again, I don't think we're really ready to get into that sort of granular legal stuff. We will have we can have our legal side of the house look into that and see if we can provide any insight or update. But I don't think we're able to get into that live here. Um, but we do have one last question before we break, and that's on whether we have available a guide that we would provide to higher ed institutions, sort of similar to the shared presentation, but a structured guide to sort of work through. And we don't have anything really pre-packaged up, but that's definitely something that Laura and her team sort of get down to business with institutions on an individual to individual basis because that is really going to look different, I think, institution to institution based on where the biggest red flags are, where priorities are, what needs to be addressed first, and what that sort of um, guide looks like for your institution. I think the slide deck and the content we've gone through today is a great basis, sort of holistically as a starting point. But we are happy to get in there in the trenches with your team to figure out how do we adapt that to something that really fits what you're going through and where your institution's priorities and sort of gaps are today because that really is going to look very different institution to institution. Anything to add there from a sort of guide structure template approach on any of this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the work that we do, and why it works well is because we do customize to the individual institution. So once we meet with you, once we hear your needs, we do provide that guide, but you're right, it is going to look different, from institution to institution, just based on, what have you already done? What are you prioritizing? What teams need the most, support? So I think that that's, the it's important. But yeah, hopefully this presentation at least gave a floor for some of the work to get done, some questions to ask.
Yep. So I think that's the last question we had come
I
in.
I did just want to plug because I saw one other additional comment, and absolutely right. So the comment was about that when you're thinking about transcripts and captions, because I did want to clarify what I said, that you can't just use a transcript and think that you've checked the box for having the caption. So under WCAG, the pre-recorded video with audio does require that synchronized captioning to meet the requirements. So a transcript alone doesn't do that. Just giving that as a suggestion. However, you do need to make sure for deaf, hard of hearing, or other disability, uh, um, that you have the synchronized caption going as the primary accommodation. Transcript is supplementary.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, thank you,
Well,
Sarah.
yeah, and thanks for jumping in and clarifying as well, and thanks Sarah for the reminder there to check in. As we said previously, we are going to get the full deck, the recording out to you so that you're able to sort of review that and take it back and share it with your teams and be able to collaborate there. We'll also maybe do some more digging on some of these questions and be able to make sure we get and I'll go through and double check all the Q&A to see if there was anything we weren't able to get to or anything that needs more clarity. But again, thank you so much. We still have a ton of folks still on the session, so thank you for hanging with us through what I think is our longest webinar to date. Definitely a topic that is essential to not only the sort of legal foundations and safety of our institutions, but the outcomes that we're generating for students. So really happy to see so much of the community come out for something like this. Laura, thank you for your time and your insights and sharing with everyone. Um, we had Michelle and Aaron's contacts up on the screen there as we were going through the Q&A. If you have any questions about how Edge might be able to support your institutions, please don't hesitate to reach out to Michelle or Aaron or Laura or I. We are always happy to follow up and help to answer some of those questions directly with you and your teams on the ground, wherever that ground might be, because Edge is based in New Jersey. But Laura is in North Carolina. We've got members and participating institutions as far away as California and Oklahoma and Florida and Maine. So we are helping schools all across the country. So we're happy to do that with you too. So um, thank you again for spending the time with us here today. And we will see you next time. And hopefully we'll talk to you soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.